Hi everyone and welcome back to another video. This video focuses on turf grass weeds that are commonly found in sports turf and golf greenkeeping. This is part of our accelerated learning series that unlocks greenkeeping skills here at Hadlow College. Get a notepad and pen, we're going to get into these weeds. Let's move on to our first one. Okay, our first weed here, daisy, which is Bellis perennis. This is probably one of the easier weeds to identify, but let's go through it nice and quickly. Quite a low growing weed, spreads across lawns, grassy areas, and it's a perennial weed as well. Very centre, you have that bright yellow sort of disc with tiny little flowers on it. It's almost like a circular disc shape. And out from that, you've got the white petals. We're now looking at dandelion. This is the next weed that we are looking at. Let's first of all look at the image on the left. This is the leaf. Long, narrow and deeply toothed. It's got the jagged tooth edges, a bit like a lion's tooth, viewed side on, hence the name dandelion. The stems are a single stem that leads up to a bright yellow flower, and you have that first of all. Then you'll later on in the season you get that sort of puff ball of a fluffy seed head, which can be used when blown as like little parachutes flying off that you've probably often did as a child. The weed on the screen now is Slender Speedwell. This has very small tiny flowers. As you can see, they're kind of like a pale blue to sort of violet colour. And if you look very closely, there's sort of dark blue lines towards a sort of yellowy white centre. Leaves are also sort of a round or sort of kidney shape, and they are again very small, very tiny, quite a low growing weed, this one, which is Slender Speedwell. Okay, so the weed we're now looking at is yarrow, Achilla milfolium. Now, milfolium is quite an interesting word because if you break that down, it means many leaves or 1,000 leaves. The word mil comes from the word French millipede, kilometre as well. Or a mile, 1,000 steps are in a mile. But the leaves are very sort of feathery and finely divided, almost like a fern. And yeah, there's just many of them that are in and out. Upright sort of stem. The growth habit has sort of spreading rhizomes, but the flowers on the common type are that white colour, and they have like a cluster sort of shape to them. You can get ornamental types of yarrow where there could be yellows or purples that can be quite attractive. But you'll often find this weed in sort of sandy conditions or very dry conditions as well. Very common indeed. Okay, so we're now looking at white clover. Let's start off with the flowers. These are small, rounded type flower heads, and they're made up of tiny white, sometimes there can be slightly sort of pink flowers as part of that ball shape, that sort of round shape. Now, Trifolium repens is the scientific name. Now, trifolium is quite an interesting sort of word if we break that down. Tri comes from the word free, folium means leaves, and these will occur in three sort of segments, and they're almost like a classic clover shape, which is that sort of roundish, almost like a rugby ball shape. As well. So that's our white clover. We'll move on to our next weed. Buttercup, Ranunculus repens. This is our next weed. A very bright, almost like glossy appearance to the yellow petals. There's usually 5 of those per flower. Now, the leaves are divided into sort of 3 toothed leaflets, and they're very jagged on the edges. Quite a low spreading in terms of creeping runners, the stolons. And it's a perennial weed. It will come out it regrows each year. It likes kind of like moist or compact sunny soils as well, often found on the golf course or in sports turf areas. Procumbent pearlwort is the weed we're looking at now. This is probably the smallest weed we're going to look at in terms of its flowers and its leaves and its stems. The flowers are absolutely tiny, whitish in colour, almost like a greenish white. The leaves are very small, they're narrow and almost quite needle-like, so they almost look like a grass. The stems are sort of thin, wiry, almost a bit like a fescue grass, but there is a distinct difference between the two in terms of the shape and how they present themselves growing and in terms of the habit. Okay, let's go on to greater plantain. There are different types of plantains, and this is greater plantain, which is the largest of the most common ones that we find within the UK golf greenkeeping and sports turf. Often find this growing in compact soils. Has a broad leaf shape, and I'd probably say the leaf is the most distinguishing feature on this on this weed. It grows from a central point outwards. Often that is described as being a rosette shaped because of its sort of central point and then growing outwards. They're broad oval shaped leaves. It does have stems that go up to a flower spike, and the flower is kind of like a greenish brown colour, and it's tightly packed with tiny little flowers up that stem, which will turn into seeds later on in the season. Okay, that's greater plantain. Okay, we'll now go on to ribwort plantain, Plantago lanceolata. Now, it does have similarities with the Plantago major, the greater plantain, but this one doesn't have as broad leaf. Lanceolata may give us a little hint here because the leaves are more like a lance, more like a sort of a long, narrow shape, a bit like a lance. It again is a sort of rosette shaped weed, and it has the flowers that come from a single spike up to the flowers, and then they'll turn into the seeds later on in the year. But that is ribwort plantain, a smaller, narrower leaf compared to the ribwort plantain. Okay, we'll go on to another weed, which is common chickweed. We'll start off with the flowers. These are very small flowers compared to the sort of the whole size of the plant. They are usually white in colour, the flowers as well. The stems tend to be sort of thin, weak and trailing and form like a spreading mat. Now when I say they're thin and weak, something like a scarification or verticutting would easily rip these out. They're not particularly sort of wedged or firm in the soil. The leaves are, again, they're very small. They have sort of an oval or an egg shape, and they're opposite sides on the stem. Lesser trefoil is the next weed. The leaves, let's start off with these. They have 3 leaflets, which is quite similar to the shape of the white clover or many other different clovers. And it's kind of like a small oval, light green in colour. Now, one of the standout features of this weed is the small, yellow, rounded flowers. They often are formed in clusters, and you may typically find 10 or 20 of these within one ball-like flower. Okay, so let's move on to moss. Many different types of mosses, but what you need to know is just to identify moss as a single species. Small, very soft, lush with tiny leaf structures, and they form sort of a dense velvety mat, typically greenish in colour, but they will stand out from the grass as a different shade of green, maybe a yellow or brown or even maybe a red in type of appearance. The leaves are absolutely minuscule, tiny leaflets, often arranged in sort of a spiral or opposite pattern on the stem. Stems are very thin, can range from a few millimetres to a few centimetres in height. Growth habit, particularly on golf greens or short turf, is very dense like a carpet. Okay, we'll now go on to knotgrass. It's called knotgrass for a reason. It almost looks like a type of grass, sort of like a thin tubular stem then off into a broader leaf. They do have tiny, rather inconspicuous, tiny white or pinkish flowers on them. And they have sort of a trailing growth habit where they'll be low to the ground and spread almost like a grass, but you can see through the stem that they're obviously not a grass. Okay, so that is not grass. Okay, so we'll now go on to creeping cinquefoil. Now, cinq in French, un, deux, trois, quatre, cinq. Cinq means five. Now, if you look at the leaves, and foil from the scientific means leaf, so directly translated, this means five leaves, or creeping five leaves, or could be a leaflet. Would be its actual correct interpretation or understanding of that. Now, I think that's quite important to recognise, as this is one of the more difficult weeds to identify, particularly because the flower looks very similar to a buttercup. It's not quite as bright as the buttercup yellow, but it looks exceptionally similar. Now, in terms of its growth habit, it spreads by sort of these creeping stems, and you can see those on the image on the right hand side.